Guys, we used to think the earth was flat. Remember that? Most of us weren't alive. We used to think the earth was flat. We used to think the sun revolved around the earth. We used to think there was nothing smaller than the atom. And we used to think life began at birth or some arbitrary place we made up. At all of these junctures, we've had to face the humility that we've been thinking about things incorrectly and maybe need to yield not even just to our Bible, but to the progress of science. I'm going to let Mark speak to that again a little bit.
So last December, I gave a sermon on, well, I called it Science versus God. And I purposely made it provocative because if you heard this sermon, or spoiler alert, there is no versus between science and God. I tried to build a case that science over time reveals God's creation. Well, I ended that sermon actually on a positive note because I said science is unraveling a lot of our false narratives that we've been told over and over again. And I pointed out the one, it's my body, it's my choice. And I pointed out technology is getting better and better at helping us see inside the womb and observe developing babies. Now, I'm purposely not using the term fetus or embryo. I'm just going to call them babies. It was really just impossible just a very few years ago. And it's not so much that the scientific understanding has changed from 1973 in Roe versus Wade, but the technological advancements in like ultrasounds, both visual and audible technology is letting us see into the womb with much, much more clarity. So I left on a positive note. I said, I think this is one area where technology and science is going to help bring the traditional Christian view to the forefront. But before I get into the accepted science of a baby's development, I want to ask that you keep some things in mind. I want you to be asking yourself, when are we a human being? When do we have personhood? That's one of the buzz phrases of today. When do we, a being of God's design, have rights accorded to a human? Even more fundamentally, is human life sacred? By the way, you won't find this in science journals, but assuming that most of us here believe in a soul, the idea of a soul, and believe that we all have souls, when is that attached to our body? Was Aristotle right? So let's take a quick look at what's happening inside the mother's womb. I'm actually going to start at week 3. You might say, wow, why start at week 3? And I didn't know this, so it really might seem confusing, but the way the doctors count, week 1, or in week 1 of pregnancy, the mother is really not pregnant. What? Week 1 is counted based on the last period due date. And mom isn't pregnant until week 3 when conception occurs. Now let me be clear here, and this is really pertinent to our point. The moment that the sperm and the egg combine, God's design for each of us individually is done. Our chromosomes are established, our DNA is established. I happen to believe that the fundamental design for each of us individually lies in our DNA. Don't think for a moment that DNA evolves or changes in week 6 or week 10 or week 12. At conception, it's done. God's design is complete. I'm going to jump forward to week 5. Already in week 5, and keep in mind, this is really only a couple weeks after conception. The baby's brain, spinal cord, and heart are discretely being developed. You can see them. They're separate things. They're not developed, of course, completely, because at this stage, he or she looks like a tiny collection of tubes. But those tubes have important purposes. One tube is forming a brain, one's forming a spinal cord, and another is developing into the baby's heart. Tiny buds are already happening on either side of the body that will eventually grow into arms and legs. I'll move to week 6. Only 3 weeks since conception. Now it's way too quiet for you to hear with the naked ear, but your baby's tiny heart has started to beat. So when you hear all these heartbeat laws, week 6. Now the heart is inside a body that's only about a half an inch long, from the top of the head to the rump. Very, very small. Frankly, still looks like a tadpole, but that's not going to last very long because things are happening very, very, very fast. Human features are starting to emerge, including 2 eyes that already have lids. The lungs and the digestive system are already starting to branch out, forming the organs that will help your baby breathe in just a few months. In week 7, and this is really only the 2nd month, the baby's body is already forming every organ in the body, including the heart, kidneys, liver, lungs, intestines. Buds are starting to sprout from those growing arms. They may look like paddles, but eventually they're going to be hands and feet. Week 8, the baby is developing at a very rapid pace. In fact, he or she has officially graduated from embryo to fetus. Yay! First graduation party. The beginnings of a face on your little bean-sized baby is apparent. You can also make out 2 eyes, a nose, ear, and even an upper lip. The baby's body is starting to straighten out. Now, week 9, the baby is still very small. Literally only about 1/8 of an ounce, so just bigger than a penny. But don't let that lead you to think that it isn't a complex body already. In fact, inside, the reproductive organs are already forming. But still, you wouldn't be able to tell from an ultrasound whether it's a boy or a girl. But if you look closely in an ultrasound video, you might see the baby move. At week 10, the baby has a real profile with well-defined eyes, mouth, and ears. The baby's eyes are wide open now. Soon they'll close back up. Inside the baby's brain, development is happening very fastly. The connections of our brain are already starting very, very rapidly. Now, some studies, and this is somewhat controversial, but some studies indicate that pain can be felt at this time or even earlier. But there is widespread agreement that pain is felt by the end of the first trimester. Week 12, this is the end of the first trimester. The baby looks like a fully formed person. Teeth, fingers, with toes, nails. It's all present. Week 13, the baby is growing quickly now and getting more proportional. And this blew me away. If it's a girl, her ovaries are already filled with thousands of eggs. That blew my mind. Already, in week 13, the next generation is being created. By week 17, the baby's lungs are breathing in amniotic fluid. Blood is pumping through the circulatory system. The kidneys are already filtering urine. Your baby's looks are changing as hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes grow. Week 18. The baby is now 5.5 inches long, from the top of the head to the rump, and weighs about 5 ounces. It's about the size of a small cell phone, big enough to really cause a stir for the mom. His or her ears, they're developed well enough at this point to hear the mom talk or sing. At week 21, You can actually see babies' rapid eye movement. It can be detected with instrumentation. The intestines are already even starting to produce meconium. Bone marrow is ramping up its production of red cells, and that's soon going to be pertinent to getting oxygen to the body. Week 24. Now, I don't expect you to read that chart at the bottom, but it's too small. But this is the week now. All this development is happening, but this is the week that's typically tied to this idea of viability that I talked about. And that's where survivability outside the womb is expected. And in 1973, that time frame was thought of as between 24 and 48 weeks. Most experts now think it's between 20 and 24 weeks. And there's multiple examples of babies that were born in 21 weeks that are living very healthy lives today. In fact, from my research, I believe the oldest is actually heading off for college. So this isn't like, oh, this is now available. His name is James Elgin Gill, born at 21 weeks. Very, very small. So this idea of viability, what does it mean? Even back at Roe versus Wade, you can't see it, but 24 weeks was the point of 50% probability of viability. That's a pretty big percentage. If we really thought human life is sacred, I mean, would you look at me if I said, okay, if I get I'm not going to survive unless I get a heart transplant. Well, you know, there's only a 50% chance that I'll live after the operation. So, no big deal. It's a really, really odd bar, in my opinion. Week 25, the heartbeat and even possibly gentle hiccups can be felt and heard with the naked ear. Week 27 is the beginning of the third trimester. Now keep in mind, we are only now getting to the point where Roe versus Wade says, well, you can have an abortion before this. You don't even need a reason. The baby is now settled into a regular schedule. The baby is alternating between periods of sleep and wakefulness. The rest of it, just one chart, because it's really just all about growing and maturing. You know, bones. Just everything it's just getting more like a real person. This is where, by the way, one reason that it gets really, really uncomfortable at the stage for women that are pregnant is because the bones are getting harder and harder. They were softer earlier on, but boy, when they get hard, I don't even think you'll get it because that's right, I don't have any uterus, can't talk about this. 37 is full term, and week 40 is when the baby is due. So I actually I want to go back to where I started. Again, let's ask those questions that I asked a while back. And I think the next chart just repeats them. When do we come? When are we human? When do we have rights according to a human? Do we really think all human life is sacred? Okay, we have a soul. When does that happen? And this one. Are we ever just a part of the woman's body and nothing more? Now, for me, the answer is simple. I'm telling you, I will confess. I didn't think about this too deeply as a youngster. And I didn't think it was that serious. But for me today, there's no question that from the very moment of conception, we're human. Now, you may think differently. And I'm not going to argue or plead with you, but I would ask you to articulate, knowing this science, articulate a position. Please don't land on the spot where, as James said, oh, this is different. Or please don't land at the spot where I say, oh, it doesn't matter. But again, for me, it starts at conception. So let's go a little further now, and let's get into what most of the time our sermons are all about, and that is, what does the Word say?